Miss Emily Harrison pulled her wool coat tighter against her frame as she watched the fog swirl between the ancient pines of Whispering Pines Cemetery. She was only 19, yet the weight on her shoulders felt centuries old. In front of her, the fresh earth over Mr. David Harrison's casket hadn't even settled, and the silence of the graveyard was broken only by the distant, rhythmic tolling of the old mill bell in the town square. Emily had always believed that grief would be her hardest battle. She had no idea the real nightmare was just beginning, wearing a black silk dress and a perfume so expensive it masked the scent of death itself. Mrs. Evelyn Harrison, the woman her father had married just 3 years prior, hadn't shed a single tear during the service. She stood there like a marble statue, watching Emily with eyes that held no compassion, only a cold, predatory calculation. 3 days after the funeral, the atmosphere in the Harrison manor shifted. The house, an imposing Victorian structure that had been the pride of the family for generations, felt smaller, darker. Emily was in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she tried to brew a cup of chamomile tea to steady her nerves. The sharp click-clack of high heels echoed against the polished oak floors. Evelyn walked in, clutching a genuine leather briefcase. Beside her was a man with a thin, sharp face and a neutral expression. Mr. Jonathan Sterling, the lawyer Emily had only seen a handful of times at the town's charity galas. "Miss Emily, we need to discuss the future of this property," Mr. Sterling said, his voice sounding like sandpaper on metal. Emily felt a chill race down her spine. She set the teacup down. It rattled against the granite countertop. "Mr. Sterling, my father's will was very clear," Emily replied, trying to keep her voice from cracking. "The house was supposed to be held in a trust until I turned 21. Evelyn let out a short, dry laugh, a sound devoid of any humor that sliced through the kitchen's heavy air. "Oh, Emily, dear, you were always so naive, just like your father in his final days." She slid a document across the table. At the top, in cold, bold letters, it read, "Durable power of attorney and transfer of property deed." Emily leaned in, her eyes scanning the lines with desperate speed. At the bottom of the page was a signature, David Harrison. The strokes were firm, almost identical to the ones she had seen on birthday cards and school checks her whole life. But something was off, a minute tilt in the letter D, a flourish her father never used when he was under pressure or sick. This isn't possible," Emily whispered. "My father was in a medically induced coma 4 days before he passed. He couldn't have signed this on the date listed here. Mr. Sterling, were you actually present for this?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses, avoiding direct eye contact. "The document was duly notarized, Miss Emily. Mr. David Harrison called me privately, claiming he wanted to ensure Mrs. Evelyn had full autonomy to manage the estate and liquidate certain pending debts you were unaware of." "Debts? What debts?" Emily shot back, her voice rising with a mix of fear and fury. "My father was the most organized man in Oakhaven. He would never leave debts that put our home at risk." Evelyn took a step forward, closing the gap between them. The scent of jasmine from her perfume was now suffocating. "Reality is bitter, Emily. The house has been sold. The buyer is an investment group from Columbus. They plan to turn this land into a luxury condominium complex, something this town actually needs to escape its stagnation." Emily's world tilted. Oakhaven was a small town where everyone knew the Harrison name. Losing this house wasn't just losing a roof. It was erasing the history of her mother, who had planted every rose in the back garden, and her father, who had spent late nights in the study working to secure her future. "You can't throw me out," Emily said, her voice shaking but defiant. "I am the direct heir. I will contest this. I'll speak to Mr. Miller, the justice of the peace." "Mr. Miller is an old friend of my family, sweetheart," Evelyn interrupted with a smirk that suggested she knew exactly which cards were in everyone's hand. "And the paperwork is airtight. You have 72 hours to remove your personal belongings. After that, anything remaining in the house will be discarded or auctioned to cover legal fees." Emily looked at Mr. Sterling, hoping to find a shred of human decency, but she saw only a man who had been bought by the glint of Evelyn's gold. She realized in that moment that she was alone in a town that, despite its charm, hid deep secrets beneath its oak foundations. She bolted from the kitchen, running up the stairs, the sound of her own frantic footsteps echoing like a countdown. Inside her room, she locked the door and slumped against it, sliding down until she hit the floor. At 19, Miss Emily Harrison was about to become homeless in the town, where her name used to mean everything. But as the hot tears tracked down her face, something shifted inside her. The sorrow began to be consumed by a cold, persistent flame. She looked at the photograph of her father on her nightstand. He had always taught her that in Oakhaven, the strongest oak is the one that survives the most brutal storms. Emily wiped her face with the back of her hand. She wasn't just going to leave, she was going to fight. But to beat Evelyn and Sterling, she would need something she never had before: cunning. She would have to dive into the shadows of Oakhaven to find where that signature was truly forged. The inheritance game had begun, and Emily was ready to bet everything she had left to tear down the house of cards her stepmother had built over her father's grave. The 72-hour clock didn't just tick, it throbbed in Emily's ears like a second heartbeat. Rain had begun to fall over Oakhaven, a relentless grey drizzle that turned the town's charm into a somber, weeping landscape. Miss Emily Harrison stood in the centre of her father's attic, surrounded by the ghosts of her childhood. Dusty boxes of old holiday decorations, her mother's velvet dresses and stacks of architectural blueprints from her father's firm were all that remained of her legacy. She had spent the last 12 hours meticulously packing what she could, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept returning to the image of that signature, David Harrison. It was too perfect, too deliberate. Her father, in his final days, had been weak, his hands trembling from the aggressive treatments. There was no way he could have executed that final sweeping flourish on the H. Emily sat on an old trunk, her fingers brushing against a small, locked wooden box she hadn't noticed before. It was tucked behind a stack of journals from the 1990s. She recognized it immediately. It was her father's private correspondence box. She didn't have the key, but Oakhaven had taught her one thing. When the front door is locked, you check the cellar windows. Using a heavy-duty letter opener, she pried the lock. Crack. Inside weren't just letters, there were logs. Mr. David Harrison was a man of habit. He kept a meticulous record of every legal meeting, every contract, and every significant phone call. Emily's breath hitched as she found the entry for the week he supposedly signed the power of attorney. March 12th. Mr. Sterling called again regarding the estate, told him to stop bothering me while I'm with Emily. Evelyn seems agitated. I don't trust her tone lately. There was no record of a meeting on the 14th, the date on the forged document. He didn't sign it, Emily whispered to the empty room. He never saw Sterling that day. But a journal entry wasn't enough to stop an eviction. She needed the notary. In the state of Ohio, a document of that magnitude required a witness and a seal. The name on the document was Miss Sarah Jenkins. Emily knew the name. Miss Jenkins wasn't a high-profile legal clerk. She worked out of a small, cramped office in the Iron District, the part of Oakhaven where the streetlights were often broken and the bars stayed open until dawn. It was a place her father had always told her to avoid. Pfft! Emily grabbed her keys. Avoiding danger was a luxury for people who still had a home. She drove her beat-up sedan through the winding streets, passing the Oakhaven diner, where the neon sign flickered open in a sickly shade of pink. The Iron District felt like a different world. The brick buildings were stained with soot, and the air smelled of wet asphalt and cheap tobacco. She found the office, Jenkins Legal Services and Notary. It was wedged between a pawn shop and a laundromat. The windows were covered in a thick layer of grime. Emily stepped inside, the bell above the door giving a weak, rusted chime. Miss Sarah Jenkins was a woman who looked like she was made of shadows and secrets. She sat behind a desk piled high with yellowing paperwork, a cigarette burning forgotten in an ashtray. Her eyes, magnified by thick glasses, darted up to Emily. "We're closing, miss," Sarah said, her voice raspy. "I'm Miss Emily Harrison. I believe you notarized a document for my father, Mr. David Harrison, last week," Emily said, stepping closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. The woman froze. The cigarette smoke curled around her like a serpent. "Harrison. The name sounds familiar. I handle a lot of papers, dear." It was a power of attorney. It was signed on the 14th. My father was in a hospital bed, barely conscious. How did you verify his identity? Did you actually go to the hospital? Sarah Jenkins stood up abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the linoleum floor. I don't have to answer your questions. The seal is legal. If you have a problem, talk to Mr. Sterling. I'm talking to you. Emily's voice cracked with a sudden sharp authority she didn't know she possessed. My father is dead, and my house is being sold out from under me because of a document you signed. If that signature is fake, you're an accomplice to fraud. That's prison time, Miss Jenkins. Sarah's face paled, the magnification of her glasses making her fear look grotesque. She opened her mouth to speak, but the bell above the door chimed again. A shadow fell across the room. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a tailored grey suit stepped in. It wasn't Mr. Sterling. It was a man Emily didn't recognize. Mid-40s with a jawline like granite, and eyes that scanned the room with professional coldness. Is there a problem here, Sarah? The man asked. His voice was smooth, like expensive bourbon, but there was an edge of steel underneath. No, Mr. Vance, just a confused customer, Sarah stammered, her hands visibly shaking as she began to clear her desk. The man turned his gaze to Emily. He tilted his head slightly, as if evaluating a piece of art or a threat. Miss Harrison, I presume. You shouldn't be in this part of town. It's not safe for someone with your pedigree. Who are you? Emily asked, refusing to back down, though every instinct told her to run. My name is Mr. Marcus Vance. I represent the investment group that purchased your family estate. I'm here to ensure the transition goes smoothly. He smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. You have 2 days left, Emily. Don't waste them playing detective. It would be a shame if something happened to those 72 hours. It was a blatant threat, wrapped in a polite Oakhaven veneer, but a threat nonetheless. Emily stared at him, then at the terrified Sarah Jenkins. She realized then that this wasn't just a greedy stepmother and a crooked lawyer. This was a machine. Evelyn had sold her father's legacy to people who didn't care about lives, only about zip codes and profit margins. She turned and walked out of the office without another word. The rain was heavier now, soaking through her coat. She got into her car, her breath hitching. She was losing. They had the law, the money, and the muscle. But as she pulled away, she saw Sarah Jenkins watch her through the grimy window. For a split second, their eyes met. Sarah didn't look like a villain. She looked like a hostage. Emily didn't go home. She drove toward the only place she felt safe, the Oakhaven Public Library. She needed to find out who Mr. Marcus Vance really was. If Oakhaven was built on oak, it was also built on dirt, and Emily was finally ready to start digging. She was no longer the grieving daughter. She was the girl with nothing left to lose, and in Oakhaven, that made her the most dangerous person in the room. The Oakhaven Public Library was a fortress of grey stone and ivy, a gift from the town's founding industrialist back when the Red River ran black with coal dust and prosperity. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of vanilla-scented rot and old paper. To Miss Emily Harrison, it was the only place left in town that didn't feel like it was actively trying to push her out. She sat in the basement archives, the flickering fluorescent lights overhead, humming a nervous tune. Spread across the mahogany table were maps of Oakhaven from the 1950s, property tax records, and the Founder's Ledger, a local cultural relic that detailed every major land transaction in the county's history. You're looking for something specific, aren't you, Miss Emily? Emily jumped. Standing in the shadows of the tall shelves was Mr. Arthur Pendergast. He was the head librarian, a man who looked like he was made entirely of tweed and ink. He had been a close friend of Mr. David Harrison, often spending Sunday afternoons playing chess in the park near the old mill. Mr. Pendergast, you startled me, Emily whispered, her heart still racing. Apologies, dear. I saw the fire in your eyes when you walked in. It's the same look your father had when he was working on the Oakhaven revitalization project 10 years ago. Emily froze. The revitalization project? My father never mentioned it. I thought that was a new initiative by the City Council and Vance Global Holdings. Mr. Pendergast pulled up a chair, his joints creaking in sync with the old wood. Oh, it's not new. It's a ghost. Your father was the lead architect. He wasn't just building condos, Emily. He was trying to preserve the Oakhaven heritage site, the old tunnels beneath the Harrison estate. Tunnels? Emily asked, her brow furrowing. Oakhaven was a key stop on the Underground Railroad, and later, a hub for the industrial expansion. Beneath your family home lies a network of limestone caverns and historical passages. Your father discovered them during a survey. He wanted to turn the land into a protected historical park. But certain people like Mr. Marcus Vance and his associates, saw something else. Emily's fingers traced the map of her property. They don't want to build condos. They want to destroy the history. Not just destroy it, Miss Emily. They want to exploit what's under it. There were rumors of a rare mineral deposit in the limestone, something used in modern tech manufacturing. If they get that land, they don't just get a house. They get a multi-million-dollar extraction site right in the middle of a residential zone, but they couldn't do it as long as your father was alive. He had the original deeds, and he had the moral authority of Oakhaven. The realization hit Emily like a physical blow. Her father's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a tactical removal. And Evelyn wasn't just a gold digger, she was the inside man. Mr. Pendergast, I found a signature on a power of attorney, Emily said, leaning in. It's a forgery, I know it, but I can't prove who did it. The librarian sighed, his eyes reflecting a deep sadness. In Oakhaven, the law is often a matter of who owns the ink. But your father was a smart man. He used to say, if you want to hide a secret from a thief, put it in a place they think they've already robbed. Emily's mind raced back to the attic, the wooden box, the journals. Was there something she missed? Suddenly, her phone vibrated on the table. An unknown number. She answered, her voice trembling. Hello? Miss Emily, I hope you're enjoying the library. It was the smooth, bourbon-soaked voice of Mr. Marcus Vance. It's a beautiful building. It would be a tragedy if the city's budget cuts forced it to close, or if an unfortunate fire broke out in the archives. Old paper is so flammable, don't you think? Are you threatening me? Emily hissed, her hand tightening around the phone. I'm offering you a choice, Emily. My associates and I are prepared to offer you a very generous relocation stipend. $500,000, cash. You sign a non-disclosure agreement, you drop this curiosity of yours and you move to Columbus or Chicago. You could start over. A young woman like you shouldn't be digging in the dirt. It stains the fingernails. My father died for that dirt, Mr. Vance. You can keep your money. A pity, Vance replied, his tone turning ice-cold. You have 48 hours left in that house, Miss Emily. I suggest you spend them packing, not dreaming. Because after 48 hours, the Oakhaven revitalization begins. And we don't plan on leaving any ghosts behind. The line went dead. Emily looked at Mr. Pendergast. The old man looked terrified. He knows I'm here. He's watching me. You must go, Emily, Pendergast said, standing up. But take this. He handed her a small rusted key. It's to the Harrison family vault in the Oakhaven Bank and Trust. Your father left it with me years ago. He told me that if anything ever happened to him, I was to give it to you. And only you. Emily took the key. It felt heavy, a piece of metal that held the weight of her father's secrets. As she left the library, the rain had stopped, replaced by a thick, suffocating fog that rolled off the Red River. She felt eyes on her from every darkened storefront and every passing car. Oakhaven, the town she loved, had become a labyrinth of betrayal. She drove straight to the Oakhaven Bank and Trust, the tall clock tower in the center of town striking 4. She had less than 2 days to find the truth before the bulldozers arrived. But as she walked toward the bank's heavy brass doors, she noticed a black SUV parked across the street. The tinted windows reflected her own desperate image. She knew who was inside. Emily didn't flinch. She adjusted her coat, her jaw set in a line of pure Harrison steel. She wasn't just the girl being kicked out of her house anymore. She was a woman who had just found the map to the enemy's fortress. The growth was happening. The fear was still there, but it was being forged into a weapon. The Oakhaven Bank and Trust was a relic of a more stable era, built with thick granite blocks and guarded by brass doors that looked like they belonged in a fortress. It stood at the corner of Main and Elm, casting a long judgmental shadow over the town square. Miss Emily Harrison felt that shadow deeply as she stepped out of her car. The black SUV was still there, parked half a block away, its engine idling like a growling beast. Pfft! Emily didn't look back. She clutched the rusted key Mr. Pendergast had given her so tightly that the metal bit into her palm. She walked into the bank, the sudden silence of the lobby muffled by thick green carpets and the hushed whispers of tellers. "I'd like to access the Harrison family vault," Emily said to the clerk, a woman named Mrs. Gable who had known Emily since she was a toddler. "Of course, Miss Emily. We were so sorry to hear about Mr. David. He was a pillar of this community," the woman said, though her eyes flickered nervously toward the front windows. Even here, the influence of Vance Global Holdings seemed to have seeped into the walls. They walked down a narrow staircase into the bowels of the bank. The air here was colder, recycled and heavy with the smell of old copper and ozone. The vault room was a masterpiece of mechanical engineering, a massive circular door with complex gears and levers. After the formalities and the signature verification, the real signature verification, Emily was led to a private booth with a long, narrow metal box. Mrs. Gable left her alone, the heavy door clicking shut with a finality that made Emily's heart skip a beat. She inserted the key. It turned with a satisfying, heavy thunk. Inside the box wasn't gold or jewelry. It was a single, thick envelope sealed with red wax and a small digital voice recorder. Emily's hands shook as she pressed play on the recorder. "Emily, if you're hearing this, it means Oakhaven has become as dark as I feared." Her father's voice, though raspier than she remembered, filled the small booth. "I didn't want to burden you with this, but the secrets of our home are more than just limestone and tunnels. Evelyn, she wasn't just a mistake of my heart. She was a plant. She's been working for Marcus Vance since before we met. They want the mineral rights, but more importantly, they want the bridge to the state capital that only our land provides." Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Look inside the envelope, Emily. I kept a document bomb ready. It's the original unedited deed of the Harrison estate, along with a video file on an encrypted thumb drive. I recorded Evelyn and Mr. Sterling discussing the forgery plan while they thought I was unconscious in the hospital. I was weak, but I wasn't stupid. Use it. Take it to the district attorney in Columbus. Do not trust anyone in Oakhaven. The police, the mayor. They're all under Vance's thumb." Emily tore open the envelope. There it was, a thumb drive and a stack of papers that proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that the power of attorney used to evict her was a complete fabrication. But there was something else. A map. It showed the tunnels, but it also showed a hidden entrance located in the cellar of the Harrison manor, one that didn't appear on any city records. "I have it," Emily whispered, her voice gaining a sharp, cold edge. "I have everything." Suddenly the lights in the vault room flickered and died. Click. The sound of the heavy door unlocking echoed in the darkness. Emily's pulse skyrocketed. She shoved the drive and the documents into her inner coat pocket just as the door swung open. In the doorway stood a figure silhouetted by the dim emergency lights of the hallway. It wasn't Mrs. Gable. It was one of the men she had seen earlier with Mr. Marcus Vance, a silent, hulking man in a dark, tactical jacket. "Miss Harrison," the man said, his voice a low, gravelly monotone. "Mr. Vance would like to have a word. He thinks you found something that belongs to him." "This belongs to my father," Emily said, her voice steady despite the terror screaming in her veins. She felt the letter opener she had taken from the attic still in her pocket. The man stepped into the vault, his movements slow and deliberate like a predator cornering a rabbit. "Don't make this difficult, miss. It's a long walk back up those stairs." Emily looked around the small booth. There was no other exit, but her father's voice echoed in her mind. "If you want to hide a secret from a thief, put it in a place they think they've already robbed." She noticed the ventilation grate near the floor. It was old, held together by rusted screws. "You want the documents?" Emily asked, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out a decoy stack of old bank statements she had grabbed from the box. "Here, take them." She threw the papers into the man's face. As he instinctively reached out to catch them, Emily lunged. She didn't attack him. She slammed the heavy metal vault box against his knee with all the strength her Deparastion could muster. Crack! The man let out a muffled groan, buckling. Emily didn't wait. She scrambled past him, her heart hammering like a trapped bird. She burst through the door and ran for the stairs. "Hey! Stop her!" the man yelled from the vault room. Emily didn't head for the front lobby. She knew they'd be waiting there. Instead, she turned toward the service corridor Mr. Pendergast had mentioned once, a path used for moving heavy coin shipments. She burst through a heavy fire door and found herself in a narrow alley behind the bank. The rain was lashing down now, a torrential Oakhaven storm that turned the world into a blur of grey and black. She ran toward her car, but she saw the black SUV peeling around the corner, its headlights cutting through the fog like the eyes of a demon. She couldn't go to her car. She couldn't go to the police. She ducked into the shadows of an alleyway, her mind racing. There was only one place left to go, the manor. If the map was right, the tunnels beneath her house led somewhere Vance didn't know about. She had to get back to the house, retrieve the rest of her father's physical evidence, and get out of Oakhaven forever. But she was being hunted. Emily leaned against the cold brick wall, the rain soaking her to the bone. She looked at the thumb drive in her hand. This was her life, her father's legacy, and the key to destroying the men who had turned her town into a playground for greed. "I'm coming for you, Evelyn," Emily whispered into the wind. As she disappeared into the fog, a realization dawned on her. She wasn't just a 17-year-old girl anymore. Oakhaven had tried to break her, but it had only succeeded in stripping away everything that wasn't steel. She was a Harrison, and Harrisons didn't just survive storms, they owned them. The Harrison Manor loomed through the torrential rain like a skeletal giant, its windows dark and unwelcoming. For the first time in 19 years, Miss Emily Harrison didn't see it as a home. She saw it as a battlefield. She parked her car 3 blocks away, creeping through the back alleys of Oakhaven, her wool coat soaked and heavy. The black SUV was prowling the main road, its headlights scanning the fog like the eyes of a predator. Emily reached the cellar's external coal chute, a relic of Oakhaven's industrial past. She slid down into the darkness, the smell of damp earth and old limestone filling her lungs. According to her father's map, the entrance to the hidden tunnels was behind the wine rack. She pushed a specific stone, and with a low grinding sound, a portion of the wall pivoted. The tunnels were cold and narrow, built with the same sturdy oak and stone that defined the town. As she moved through the darkness, guided only by the dim light of her phone, she felt the presence of her ancestors. This wasn't just a house. It was a fortress of history. She reached a ladder that led directly into her father's study. As she climbed, she could hear voices coming through the floorboards. "The bulldozers will be here at dawn, Evelyn," the smooth, bourbon-toned voice of Mr. Marcus Vance echoed. "Sterling has already filed the final injunction. The girl is a fugitive now. Once the demolition starts, those tunnels, and whatever evidence they contain, will be buried under tons of concrete." "And the signature?" Mrs. Evelyn Harrison's voice sounded sharp, triumphant. Emily was asking questions at the notary's office. "Sarah Jenkins has been relocated," Mr. Sterling added, his voice thin and oily. "The girl has no proof, no allies, and no home. She's probably halfway to Columbus by now, crying in a motel room." Emily pushed the trapdoor open inch by inch. She emerged into the shadows behind the heavy velvet curtains of the study. The room smelled of her father's pipe tobacco and the expensive scotch Evelyn was currently pouring. "You're wrong, Mr. Sterling," Emily said, stepping out from the shadows. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a thunderclap. Evelyn dropped her glass. The amber liquid splattered across the white rug like a bloodstain. Mr. Vance didn't flinch. He simply turned, his eyes narrowing. "Miss Emily," Vance said, a dark smile playing on his lips, "you have a habit of showing up where you aren't wanted. I believe you have something that belongs to me." "I have something that belongs to the state of Ohio," Emily countered. She pulled the digital voice recorder from her pocket and pressed play. The room filled with the sound of Evelyn's voice. "We need to make sure the forgery is perfect, Sterling. David won't last another night. I want that house sold before the funeral." Evelyn's face turned a sickly shade of grey. That's a deep fake. It's an AI manipulation." Is the deed in the vault a deepfake too? Emily asked, pulling out the original, unedited document. The one that proves my father placed this entire property, including the mineral rights, into a non-transferable historical trust. A trust that requires my signature to dissolve. Mr. Sterling stepped forward, his face twitching. That document is obsolete, Emily. We have the notarized power of attorney. The one Sarah Jenkins just confessed was forged? Emily lied, her eyes locked on Vance. She knew Sarah hadn't talked yet, but she saw the flicker of doubt in Vance's eyes. Ninja Pro strategy. Seed the doubt. The district attorney in Columbus has been receiving live-streamed audio from my phone since I entered the bank. Oakhaven might be under your thumb, Mr. Vance, but the state capital is a different story. Vance's smile vanished. The Oakhaven revitalization wasn't just a project, it was a multi-million-dollar fraud. If the state investigated, he wouldn't just lose the land, he'd lose his empire. "Give me the drive, Emily," Vance said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He reached into his jacket and the glint of a silenced pistol caught the light. "You're a smart girl. Don't die for a pile of old stones." Emily didn't move. "I'm not dying for stones, Mr. Vance. I'm living for the truth." Suddenly the silence was shattered, not by a gunshot, but by the rhythmic, deafening wail of sirens. Blue and red lights began to dance against the study's windows, reflecting off the falling rain. "Oakhaven police," Evelyn whispered, panicked. "State troopers," Emily corrected. "I called them from the library, Mr. Vance. I told them there was a hostage situation involving the Harrison estate. I guess they took it seriously." The heavy oak doors of the manor burst open. Miss Emily Harrison watched as the world she knew was dismantled. Mr. Sterling was the first to be handcuffed, his arrogance vanishing into a stuttering mess of legal jargon. Mrs. Evelyn Harrison screamed, a jagged, ugly sound, as she was led away in the same silk dress she had worn to her husband's funeral. Mr. Marcus Vance stood still as a trooper approached him. He looked at Emily, his eyes cold and empty. "You think you've won, Miss Harrison? Oakhaven is a dying town. I was its cure." "You were its parasite," Emily replied. As the house cleared, Emily stood alone in the study. The storm was finally breaking, the first hints of a cold, grey dawn creeping over the horizon. She walked over to her father's desk and picked up the photograph of them at the old mill. She was 19. She had lost her father, her sense of security, and her innocence. But as she looked out at the town of Oakhaven, she realized she had gained something much more powerful. She had found her voice. She had grown from a grieving daughter into the guardian of a legacy. The Harrison Manor wouldn't be turned into condos. The tunnels wouldn't be filled with concrete. Oakhaven would remember its history, and Emily would be the one to write the next chapter.